Hello and welcome to Big Little Live in partnership with Buick. I'm Amanda Dobbins from The Ringer.
I'm Mina from ESPN.
And we are gonna buy a polar bear for every child in this school. We're here to talk about episode 3 of Big Little Lies. This is The Ringer's Big Little Lies after show. Mina, it is the end of the world apparently. This episode is called The End of the World, and that is both a literal and emotional symbolic title.
And no one feels fine in Monterey. I mean, there's so much anxiety pervading this episode, which is amazing because nothing happens as far as the murder cover-up, right? All this anxiety is tied, well, a little bit, but most of the anxiety stems from other issues.
Yes, most of the anxiety stems from hiding a giant secret, not very well. Once again, I have some concerns with these people's ability to keep major secrets because the minor ones keep fluttering out, and also because it seems that everyone around them is aware that something is up.
No one is in like a good place at
Yeah.
the end? Well, I guess Jane, so there's that final montage, right, where all of the women are either thinking about or experiencing various things. Jane is slow hugging, dancing with her aquarium boyfriend. Not as troublesome, but the rest of the women are in a tough spot.
Yeah. It also, the episode title comes literally from some concerns about the climate change and the actual end of the world, which is mostly stems from Renata's plotline. This is actually a very, congratulations to you, huge Renata episode. Renata gets her moment. Everyone has kind of had, there's episodes that's focused on like every character at this point, and now this is the Renata one. So we're gonna start the show, as we do, with the Monterey Top 5, which is our character by character breakdown of the episode. And we're going with Renata, the Medusa of Monterey.
I just want someone to call me the Medusa of Mount Washington.
Okay.
Is that too much?
It's available. I would love to do that for you any time. Yeah, so major things that happened to Renata in this episode. I guess we should start with Emma Bella's anxiety attack.
Yes, which is really strange, right? So she's in the classroom. All the kids are in the classroom in second grade with their teacher, and they're talking about the children's book, Charlotte's Web.
Sure.
And the teacher starts off by asking everyone if Charlotte is a liar because she was pumping up Wilbur the pig, for those who don't remember the plot of Charlotte's Web.
Right.
And which I think is kind of like a strange way to kick off any discussion about the book.
Why don't you share where the discussion is going?
Right, so, the kids have a couple of amusing reactions that are very on brand, I suppose, as Chloe would say, who says that perhaps it's a rebranding exercise.
Chloe. I mean, we'll talk about it another time, but Chloe needs a timeout.
So extra. Chloe, and then Ziggy says, well, sometimes grown-ups lie to protect their kids, which is like a little bit on the nose, I think. And then there's like and then the teacher responds to them by saying, well, what if it's actually about sustainability? Because
no, he says, what's this actually about? And all the kids chant in chorus. Sustainability.
Yes.
Right. It's very clear that this has been part of the curriculum for a while.
Which suggests that they have said that a lot. And he's like, yes, and it's like, don't eat pigs or whatever because it's bad for the environment, which is freaking insane. And then you hear like a bloop sound, and
it's like the closet door opens, and then it's like that shot from The Wizard of Oz, with the legs sticking out, except it's poor Amabella.
Okay, and that's my issue with this, which is everyone's upset about the teacher for making Charlotte's Web about sustainability, which is stupid. Maybe they should be upset with him because there was a kid in the closet, and he apparently had no idea until she flopped out.
Yeah, do you know who is upset with him? One Renata Klein, who shows up, cut to the hospital.
Yes.
Renata storms in, definitely yells at the teacher in passing, what did you do?
Yeah.
And then she finds Amabella, and so Amabella has had an anxiety attack. And the hospital behavior, Renata, it's classic and inappropriate. At one point she screams, hello, doctor, I would like my child transferred to Stanford, please. And then her reasoning is, because it's Stanford, which is not appropriate.
The doctor, I'm paraphrasing here, says something like, your behavior's not helping here. And Renata does a classic Mina Kimes move, which is just responds by repeating it, but going, your behavior's not helping you to the doctor, which is so ridiculous.
It's not appropriate, and Amabella is fine. Amabella's fine. She's fine. She has some anxiety. She is released from the hospital. A very strange therapist, who we'll talk more about, comes to visit her and reveals that she is anxious about, in descending order, the planet, Gordon going to jail, and Renata, because Amabella has noticed that something is up with Renata and has been for some time. There are eerily perceptive children on this show.
I was just about to ask, how does she know that Gordon might go to jail? Because they definitely didn't tell him Do all the children, they didn't tell her, I imagine
they didn't
that.
see it. I can also imagine Renata kind of going home and, again, not a lot of great parent-kid boundaries in this show, so you could imagine Renata very angrily explaining to her, which is I'm not a parent, but I know you're not supposed to do that.
Right, or she overheard, which is a common theme.
Right, but Sue, I think she seems smart and knows what's going on. But it is really interesting.
Genius IQ.
Yeah.
In case you forgot.
Oh, right, that's right, 152. Thanks so much.
Can't
Sorry.
believe you remembered
Apologies to Amabella. But it does seem the kids are noticeably perceptive of the fact that their moms are. I guess that makes sense in a way. This is about parent-kid relationships and that kids know more and are affected by them. So it makes sense that you would know if your mom is off.
And I think it's telling that the therapist, Dr. Peep, who we'll talk about, or Dr. Bo Peep, gives them 3 reasons, and they largely ignore the first 2 and just focus on the climate change one, or the teacher teaching them about climate change rather than looking inward and saying, oh, maybe we need to discuss how we're behaving around her and maybe not showing her what we're going through. Nope, we are going straight to the school to beef with the principal.
An all-time classic parent-teacher confrontation, I would say, and also she threatens to buy all the children a polar bear, which is insensitive and maybe not learning the lessons from anyone that we want Renata to. But yes, so she goes and yells at Warren. Warren yells right back. There's going to be an assembly later, which is, we'll get there. And then she goes home and confronts Gordon because Renata needs to let out her anxiety and frustration on everyone else.
Yes.
I don't relate at all. And don't know what that's about.
Can't imagine.
And,
couldn't be me.
But then Gordon kind of points out the same thing. They're yelling, they're in his ridiculous man cave, and she's yelling about selling the trains and the fake pop art and whatever. And he calls her and he's like, what's up with you?
Yes.
And I guess I'm just wondering if every single person in each character's life is deeply aware that something is wrong and has been wrong for a long time, basically since a certain extremely traumatic and public event.
Right.
How much longer until this all comes together?
I know, I would like to think if I murdered someone and covered it up, or I was complicit in a murder, rather, Renata did not actually do it. She was just an accessory that my husband perhaps would notice a change in my behavior. So it's a point actually in Gordon's favor. But yes, he has this conversation where he says, you were always impenetrable, right? He had her guardrails up. He said that about her.
Yes,
and
this high, very high.
Yes, very high. And he says lately, they're back up and something must be going on. So he does intuit that there has been some sort of incident. He doesn't know what it is. I don't think, it's interesting too, because I don't think Renata's really shown any signs of feeling that affected by it outwardly. Certainly not like a Bonnie where she's going on these long angsty runs. But maybe she is. Maybe she has been affected by it.
Right. It is interesting that Gordon doesn't think it would have anything to do with his own insider trading, but I guess that's a different story for a different day. This is the Monterey Top 5. We're going through the episode character by character. I mentioned the assembly. It is important now that we talk about Madeline, my beautiful Madeline, searching for truth and the rainbow connection. So this episode starts with Ed and Madeline, or it's pretty early in the episode, it's Ed and Madeline at this same therapist that Celeste goes to and that Celeste and Perry went to, which again, I'm not a licensed therapist. I think this therapist has a lot of insight. I don't think that you're supposed to share therapists that closely.
I don't think
I don't know, but it just seems like, the webs are already a little tangled in Monterey and in this particular group of 5 people. Do we really need to be this close?
Yeah, and we know that the therapist knows who Madeline is, by the way, because in the previous episode, she asks Celeste to put Madeline, her friend, in her shoes, so she knows about all these friendships. I mean, this therapist is, I have been to therapists. She seems a little bit more active, perhaps, than some of the ones that I've seen in the past. So the scene is really incredible, right? Because it opens with Madeline, and you think at first, or at least I thought she was alone, and then it pans out,
over,
and you see Ed there, and the therapist is asking, she's talking to her about the infidelity, and she kind of gives it to Ed a little bit.
I think she says, we'll talk about your betrayal in a minute.
Yes, which is, again, a pretty aggressive.
Yeah, she's both functioning as, I think, a very insightful therapist and also like a subtle exposition machine and kind of explaining some of the things that the show wants the character to know, which it's a TV show. I think you got to do what you got to do.
It's totally
and I do think she is quite perceptive. But I also agree that it's not like usually how therapy works.
She says
or not the therapist I have been to.
She says to Ed, adultery is one form of betrayal, but so is disengagement, which honestly I hadn't really thought of until she introduced it into the story and sort of indicts Ed a little bit for maybe not being as involved in their marriage or as active as he could have been.
Yes.
And then she asks Madeline a really important question, which is one that kind of resonates throughout the episode, which you and I have discussed.
Yeah.
Why'd you cheat?
Yeah.
Because there's not really a simple explanation, and Madeline doesn't have one.
She doesn't have an answer for it, yeah. It is, the therapist is just presenting a lot of questions that these people just have not even considered, which I suppose is what a therapist does. Ed does not seem to take the whole betrayal and Ed doesn't seem to take the therapist's point that he's involved in this to heart. He is not taking the high road, as I would say, given their confrontation at the cafe, when he is just quite cruel to Madeline.
Yes.
With reason. I mean, she's in the wrong by the definition of marriage, as I understand it between them. Anyway, I'm not judging anybody's marriage, but he's not being nice about it.
No, she's talking to Bonnie, and I guess they're just having a yuck or something. Bonnie's telling him about his mother, and he's like,
I guess they're having the lunch that Nathan finally suggested.
Right, so maybe Nathan wasn't actually that far off and asking Ed to step in. But Madeline walks up, and I think he says it's a twofer, right? Because I'm hurting both you and Nathan.
It's not mature. That doesn't indicate that he's in this spirit that couples therapy might suggest, which is growing and healing.
Yes, and I struggle with, he was betrayed greatly. I'm not really sure how much I'm supposed to side against him necessarily, but she asks him, why are you still punishing me?
Yeah.
Which it's like, okay, we kind of know why. It's not a mystery.
That's true. Yeah. She's clearly trying to fight back, and I was thinking in this episode we haven't seen her kind of break down and have the full emotional, oh my God, this all fell apart, and then we got to the assembly, and then we got to. I think I found this funnier than you did. Madeline's kind of breakdown at the assembly. I think there was something about the writing of the Rainbow Connection bit and the not remembering the lines, and it keeps going, and then the cutaways to people in the audience.
Those are...
Including Renata and Celeste. I mean, that seems like that'll be the meme of Renata just kind of
Fine.
And then that seems like that's usable. I know how I would use that on the internet in my own life. But then also just random parents kind of someone videoing and Nathan snickering. I found it genuinely extremely funny and a great affecting comedic performance by Reese Witherspoon while also being pretty sad, because that's when all the emotions came out to me.
Yeah, I watched it twice because I was trying to understand the substance of what she's saying. So she gets up, so obviously the assembly, well maybe not obviously, because who really has assemblies about this kind of thing? The assembly is about the great climate change controversy of 2019. The principal begins by saying, some of you guys have reached out to me, and Renata jumps in to say, you're welcome, or something like that, which is just fabulous. And then Madeline gets upset, so he invites her on stage to speak her thoughts. And boy, does she speak her thoughts. But they're kind of complicated, and they're definitely not about climate change, and they're almost certainly about her marriage, because at the end, she's looking out and imagining that Ed's the only person in the audience. So she begins by kind of ranting about how happy endings aren't real. Actually, she's kind of making a case for teaching kids about climate change because they need to learn that.
She points out it's a lot to lay on a bunch of 8-year-olds, which that's true.
Yes. And so she says, happy endings aren't real all the time. And then she starts trying to recite the lyrics from Rainbow Connection.
And then there's another part that's about this.
Yes.
And gets to it's really good.
And if you look up the lyrics to the song, it's kind of interesting because it is a Muppets song. Yes. It's Kermit the Frog singing. But it's really deep and dark, and I mean, it really depends on it. The lyrics could be taken in a couple different ways. It's about chasing your rainbow and following your dreams, but you could take it in the positive way, which is like Kermit left the swamp, I believe, and went on to join the other Muppets. So that one, I did research. But you could also take it in the way that I kind of think Reese is implying when she gets into it, which is sometimes there's not a pot of gold at the end, and these dreams are, like a little bit foolish to chase after.
Yeah, she's having some personal realizations in real time, and I don't want to say I relate too much to this, but I do relate to it a lot. That she's a perfectionist, and I think this idea that she has convinced herself, and she talks a lot about it when she's talking with Abigail in season 1 about her affair, of just feeling the pressure that everything has to be right and everything has to turn out to be happy, and both that it's her responsibility to make sure that happens, but also that she expects it to be so, and I think all of that is crumbling at the same time in front of an assembly full of people at elementary school.
Well, in some ways, her speech sort of, I don't think it answers, but at least tries to grapple with the question that the therapist posed in the beginning, which is why did you cheat? And she clearly doesn't know why at that moment. And when she's talking through it, she's talking through this concept of being unsettled and always wanting something more, which is what Mary Louise says to her in the very first episode. You're like me, you're a wanter. You always want something you don't have, whether it's a job or a college education or passion or maybe something outside of beyond the marriage you have. You're always striving for something, and it feels like she's kind of coming to terms with that in a way and realizing it hasn't given her happiness.
Yeah, and at least working through it, that's important. It's sort of forward progress. I'm not really sure. Anyway, I'm rooting for her. We're doing the Monterey Top 5 when we're going through the episode character by character. The Madeline stuff reminded me briefly of Celeste, so let's talk about Celeste. I thought that there were some really nice friendship moments between Madeline and Celeste in this episode, and Celeste talking about, she says that kind of thing of I should have told you about the abuse and you would have pulled me right out, which is really lovely.
Out of the pool,
yes.
She says, which I don't know if you caught that. Yeah, so we've been talking about how many references there are to drowning this season, whether it's Bonnie's mother talking about having a vision or this reference to, I guess, Madeline pulled out one of Celeste's kids from drowning. You caught that in the last episode. So I was a little bit confused by this reference because she said you would have dove in and pulled me out of the pool. It seemed a little bit overt, but it's something that caught my eye. I
was also really impressed after the climactic assembly and Madeline's speech. As Ed is leaving, Celeste yells at him. And it's you could have done something. And she stands up for Madeline, which is not something that we've seen her do for herself.
Yet another.
And was very exciting. And I thought, those were positive moments for me and Celeste in what was otherwise a pretty tough episode. She's not doing well. She's not really, her therapist is concerned that she's kind of, the healing process is possibly not as healthy as it could be, and obviously the last image is very tough.
Yeah,
grief takes strange forms, I suppose.
Right. I'm glad you, by the way, called out her chewing out Ed because I felt the exact same way. I was kind of thrilled by it. In the same way, I was not thrilled, but happy in the last episode when the therapist asks her to imagine Madeline being abused.
Yeah.
Right? And it's this constant okay, I'm going to be really hard on myself and I'm going to blame myself. But if you bring my friend into this, she's kind of able to step up and step outside of herself in a way and be strong. The therapist stuff, again, our favorite therapist, it's a little tough. She asks her, you mentioned that, she's not been healing as quickly, but physically, the therapist asks her about these bruises she has and whether or not they're self-inflicted. And Celeste says no, that she got them while breaking up a fight between the boys. Totally plausible. But then later on, there's this, I was confused by the scene briefly. It's a very quick cut of a makeup bottle, and she's standing in front of a mirror, and it reminded me of how she used to have to cover up her bruises. That doesn't mean necessarily that she inflicted themselves. I just don't really know what to believe right now.
I think that's true, and I think we're meant to understand that she is not kind of making any forward progress, or that, and that's, who can make progress in grief? I really honestly, even for a fictional character, that's not kind of the phrase that I would use, but just that she is kind of stuck and is kind of going through a lot of the same things that she was going through before Perry died.
Yes.
And it's tough.
Especially if you have to process your own grief and the grief of your children at the same time. Yes. She says to the therapist, I'm trying to remember the good things about him because it's helping me and my family get through this. Which,
yes.
I believe that. That makes sense.
Right.
But also, not you. Maybe it's good for your kids, but
yes, exactly.
You shouldn't be thinking about these things in the end of the episode, obviously.
Right. Anyway, I wish Celeste well. I'm hoping that we'll work it out. It also seems like there is, I mean, Meryl is still in her house. Mary Louise is still living in her house, so we're going to have to work through that at some point. If you're just joining us, this is Big Little Live in partnership with Buick. We're doing the Monterey Top 5, where we go through the episode character by character. It's time to talk about Bonnie. I think this will be very quick. Mina, did you know that water can be dangerous? Especially on this show with its 18 drowning references.
So it starts the episode with, actually it begins when she has a flashback to the murder and feels guilty about it. But early on in the episode, there's I think it's a flashback of Bonnie's mother carrying her by the ocean.
Yeah.
Right?
And there is also, I believe, a flashback of Bonnie's mother teaching Bonnie how to swim.
Right, and then shoving her underwater.
Yes, which is a tough love attitude that we have seen demonstrated in this show so far. Yes, so that motif seems to be recurring. The really only other note that I want to touch upon with Bonnie is that Bonnie and Jane have a nice moment on the beach.
They're friends.
That's great, that's very sweet. And Bonnie is advising Jane to be open with Aquarium Guy. And then Bonnie says, I'm such a hypocrite. Nathan doesn't know who I am at all.
Which is something we have been...
Which we knew. We were aware.
Speculating about.
We were not aware that Bonnie was aware or that she's just really openly talking about it.
Yeah. It's interesting the way, again, like the cover-up of the murder is not really front and center in this episode, or really the last few episodes. It hasn't, they haven't sort of crossed that bridge yet, having to deal with it. But that cover-up interpersonally has led all of these women to realize, oh, right, I'm covering up a lot of parts of myself, maybe hiding things about myself from my partner or my children.
Right.
And I think that's certainly the case with Bonnie. Like, the problem isn't just that she isn't able to tell her husband about the murder, it's that she clearly isn't able to tell him anything, and maybe she sought him out explicitly for that reason.
Yes, and also maybe that's not gonna work for too much longer. Yeah, our last person in the Monterey Top 5 is Jane. This is a real up and down episode for Jane. I think we would both just like to say, Shailene Woodley, you're a tremendous actress. Yeah, we are and anything that we said about season 1, we were wrong. This is just a very affecting, impressive performance.
So good. The younger actresses there in this season are so good.
You want to start with the positive stuff?
Yeah.
She goes on what seems like a nice date.
Yes.
With Aquarium Guy. What is his real name? Do you remember?
Corey.
Okay, Mina knows his real name. I am just going to call him Aquarium Guy.
Yeah.
And he is very concerned about overfishing, which I admire.
Yes.
And he also seems to be very sensitive to her needs and what she is comfortable doing and not comfortable doing, which is great. I think that we haven't seen like a perceptive, sensitive guy on this show entirely.
That's a good point. Yeah, he is definitely more perceptive. And it's funny because I think he's supposed to be really young. And she is too, which we'll get to in a second. But, in case you can't tell from him wearing a jean jacket with a tie, I think he is definitely in his early 20s.
That is cute.
Yeah, I think the show, his character actually, not to spend time on Corey, but his character is a good example of this show, how they can sort of play with stereotypes and ridiculousness. Like, of course, the hipster 20-something is asking about whether fish are farm-raised or wild, and he's wearing a denim jacket with a tie, and he's a little bit ridiculous. But that same character can also have a lot of depth.
Yes.
And I think his role in the show so far is to help Jane process some of the things that have happened to her, because she not only has she not dated. We learn in this episode when Mary Louise confronts her about whether or not Ziggy's actually Perry's son, that he was the first person she'd ever slept with.
Yeah, I wondered about that phrasing. And let's set the scene.
Yeah.
Mary Louise shows up at the aquarium and demands a paternity test, and that scene is unbelievably tough. And there is a scene later on when Mary Louise and Jane actually do wind up having coffee together that is even tougher. But she does, in the course of demanding for a paternity test, Jane explaining why is that was the only person I'd been with. And you interpreted that as ever. I heard it as in that time, but that's just interpretation.
That scene is tough for, both scenes are really tough for a number of reasons. I mean, I guess they bring up all sorts of issues about, because basically, okay, so we should just...
Yeah, do you want to, it's Detective Merrill. Detective Merrill is when we check in on Merrill, and I think Detective Merrill and Jane in this episode are pretty much, they are together. It's a a two-parter. Yeah.
So the first
Two-hander.
confrontation takes place at Jane's workplace. Meryl walks up.
Inappropriate.
Totally inappropriate.
There are people
Not
walking
okay.
behind Jane as Meryl is just like loudly yelling about paternity tests. That's not okay.
So she walks up and she's wearing one of her scarves, and I notice the scarf because she wears like a different scarf in every scene, and once you start looking at them, you can't not notice them. And this one has hunting dogs on it because she is fully in. Of course, I know it's the one with dogs, but she's like in the hunt mode, right?
Oh wow! Look at you and your scarf symbolism.
And she confronts her, and she's asking her, you know, right off the bat if she'll take a paternity test, which is so aggressive and inappropriate to ask. Like, she knows that she's a rape victim, or that she is told Celeste that. I mean, for her to come out.
Though it's very clear, especially in that first meeting, that she doesn't believe that.
Right. Sorry.
And it's which is like that's also inappropriate, but she's asking from this place of, I need you to confirm that this didn't happen. And Jane is like, I was there and I know what happened.
Yes, get bent.
Yeah, so fast forward to Jane and Ziggy are going to school, and Mary Louise is just like lurking down by the alley, which like no, and it is, again, to your point from the first episode, it's kind of shot like a horror movie. She's there out of nowhere.
She literally like pops up from behind a post. By the way, the apartment we learned is by the ocean, so at least
I actually wondered whether it was the apartment that Celeste rented in season 1. I have no confirmation of that. It just kind of looked similar from the outside.
That would be
heavy. Yes.
Okay, so this time Meryl is wearing a scarf with flowers. She's in peacemaker mode. She's trying to.
You just wrote down every scarf design.
Once you start noticing them,
it's good.
They are just like there.
Salute you. It's great. Okay.
But she goes in softer this time. It's her initially, right? Her approach to Jane
so the
is
horror
different.
Movie shot, like part of the why it's so scary is because she's like kind of grinning. She looks like really, and I was like, oh God, what's gonna happen? But it turns out that the reason that she is grinning is because Ziggy looks like has an astonishing resemblance to Raymond. It's Raymond.
Who's Raymond?
Yeah.
Yeah, but she goes in soft this time. She's because she went in pretty hard the first time. You know, it's more of less of a take the paternity test, I don't believe you, and more of a I want to get to know you. Tell me about your son. She says I'd like to meet him. You know, and you're right. They go to the coffee shop. She sits down. She shows her these pictures of Raymond, and she starts talking about.
And she's glowing. She just has like.
So rough.
Again, I mean, Meryl Streep is the greatest actress of all time for a reason, but she is just doing full grandmother pride.
Right.
And then just like immediately downshifts into, are you sure it was rape? Which is just, it's so upsetting to watch.
It's really, really hard to watch. Yeah, right. It's after she says, she asks her, Jane, if Ziggy is sweet, and she says, my boys were really sweet, Perry was so tender, whatever. And then Jane, again, to her, Jane is not giving any ground to this woman, which I personally was really, it's very validating to watch because we know the truth.
Yes.
And it's great to see her stand up to her, and she says, well, he did not become a sweet person, you know. And then she starts asking her about, well, did you come on to him? And Celeste told me that they had a lot of violence in their sex life. She weaponizes that again. She's like, maybe there was a misunderstanding. And once again, Jane asserts herself and says, I was screaming, stop.
Yes.
Which, it's so hard. This whole scene is really difficult to watch, especially because Meryl Streep like plays it so many different ways and changes, you know, she downshifts, she changes her like kind of approach.
And she starts doing that as a mother, I'm just trying to, she starts playing the I'm a mother too card, which is something that, you know, has been played throughout this show from different people. It's just like, I'm just trying to be the best mother that I can. I wanted to ask you, this is a complicated question. Do you have any empathy at all for Mary Louise, the character?
I do, in this scene, right? So I was so angry with her as she was posing these questions because, you know, there's this kind of larger sort of, there are shades of Me Too and some of the backlash you see towards women when they come out and explain, you know, talk about sexual assault or rape or violence. You have these detractors who say, well, maybe some of her language even, like, did you initiate it? You know, perhaps you misunderstood. That's infuriating to hear. But and there's a bit of a generational gap as well that definitely comes into play.
It's difficult to listen to. I was even mad at the writing in that particular point because I was like, why are you making Meryl Streep do this?
Yeah,
this is not what I want. And again, that's why it's complicated.
It makes sense because she's not a random internet commenter asking these questions. She is the mother of the perpetrator. And again, while I was so angry with her and frustrated with her while watching it, it also, I think, logically made a lot of sense that her brain would go to those places.
Right.
If she's trying to defend her son, or as she says, she refuses to surrender to the idea that he's a villain.
Absolutely, and we've talked about this show as in a lot of ways interrogation of what it is to be a parent and a mother, and this is kind of exploring like the furthest reaches of what can you justifiably do as a mother trying to protect a child. And it's very hard to watch, but I do agree, I feel a little bit of empathy. Two things I don't feel empathy for. You ready? Number one, rifling through Celeste's prescription drugs. She's just caught. And then she tries to give a little lecture about using, I guess, Vicodin or whatever.
You have an impressive array, she says, passive-aggressively.
Yes. So that happens.
Yes.
And then she also goes to visit Detective Quinlan.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we said that maybe, are you doing your conspiracy
She's wearing
theory?
the flower scarf in that one.
Okay.
She's trying to get something
I'm sorry,
out of
I
her.
thought you had another conspiracy theory.
No.
Scarf time with
No
Mina
conspiracy
guys.
theory. Yeah, she does go to her, because we were asking at the end of the last episode, is she actually going to follow through with threats and go to the detective? And she basically is like, look, I don't think you slipped. You don't think you slipped, right? And then we don't see Detective Quinlan's reaction.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we said in the last episode we didn't think she would go to the police. We were wrong. So, that's okay. It's important to admit when you're wrong, and I'm not really sure how that's going to shake out, which is, I suppose, the thrust of a good television show.
I think it's important that she went to, because her character and the performance is supposed to constantly keep us on edge. Where I think with the other women, every episode that goes by, we understand them a little bit more.
And she's the villain.
I feel like also I understand her less every episode. Like I have no idea what is motivating her, whether any of the empathy she displays in certain moments is calculated or real. It's kind of impossible to tell at this point.
It is great writing. I was mad at it, but it is great writing and a great performance. Mina, we will be right back with more Big Little Live. Welcome back to Big Little Live in partnership with Buick. This is a show about parents, and as discussed, Mina and I are not the children of human parents. You got it?
That.
Respect to Lenny.
Thanks.
So from time to time, we ask a parent to come and explain some questions that we have. Today, joining us is the Ringer's very own, the greatest dad I know who is not my own. It's Bill Simmons.
That's really nice of you.
Yeah, well, I think it's true.
You do compliment my parenting skills.
I think that you're a great parent. I have met your children. I think they're lovely.
They're relatively well behaved. Yeah,
they are 14 and
14-year-old girl, 11-year-old boy.
Right.
The boy is probably a bigger problem long term than the girl. The girl seems to have a good head on her shoulders.
Yeah, it's an interesting age for both of them, and you seem to be doing great.
Yeah, 8th grade's gets a little wonky in 8th grade there. Yeah, some things are starting to happen.
We're gonna
Nothing with her, but the friends.
We're going to ask you some questions about 2nd grade to start.
Yeah,
specifically.
okay.
So,
I remember 2nd grade.
we have some questions from this episode. The first one is it appropriate to teach 8-year-olds about climate change?
No.
You don't think so?
No,
in any capacity, not just as an allegory for Charlotte's Web.
My experience with 2nd grade was they just kind of run around outside during recess and they're just kind of all idiots. I don't think they would have a conversation like that.
Yeah.
Was that your experience of 2nd grade or your kids? Because now kids go through school we were just told, go outside, figure it out, come back in 8 hours. Now it's...
And memorize the presidents and then you'll be
fine. The only thing that's happening with parenting with 2nd graders is you're handing them an iPad and hoping they stay quiet for like 2 hours.
Okay, but what do you do if a kid comes home and it's like, I learned this thing at school, and it's like very wild, and it's maybe not something that you would have taught the child?
If my 2nd grader came home from school and said they learned anything, I would have been excited. Like literally nothing happened. So it's just like 8 hours of playtime.
Yeah.
So like you'd be excited if they learned, hey, I saw a map. And I know where California is now. You'd be like, that's awesome, really? Point it out to me. Like, you'd be excited. That would be like a huge win.
Do you feel like the kids on the show are way too smart? Chloe is the music. She called it a rebranding exercise in this episode. Like, that seems very unrealistic to me.
Yeah, when you see like a 7-year-old reading a book, you get suspicious. Like, what's going on in that house? That kid's reading. That book has like 200 pages. What's happening? It's just they're not rocket science.
Yeah,
scientists
that makes sense. Do you feel the kids are perceptive at that age?
Yeah,
so they would know something's wrong?
It's the biggest problem with this show, I wish they had hired me as a consultant, is the kids don't really seem to act like kids.
Okay.
Kids are just like in their own world. They're on devices.
Yeah.
Especially like when you're talking about wealthier families. The parents just give the kids devices, and it starts when they're like 4. Yeah. Like my friend Sal posted this Instagram picture of his 3 sons all in the same room, all on iPads next to each other, not talking to one another. That's what happens with kids. They're playing video games, they're on YouTube.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of in their own little world. So like that I think it was the third episode when Shailene Woodley brings, what's his name? What's the
Ziggy.
kid's? Ziggy?
Oh, right, they're surfing?
No, brings to the other two to meet his half-brothers.
That's in the second one, yeah.
Oh, right,
It's very
yeah, that was last
sad.
week,
It's
yeah.
emotional.
It's sad, it's emotional, but it's also not how three kids would interact. It'd be like, hey, here's a kid and here are two kids. Why don't you guys play? Like,
Yeah.
they size each other up like cats.
Yeah. Can I
It's
ask?
not, there's a lot of like sneaking around and it's just not like that.
Can I ask you another is this realistic question?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I just have.
None of the show is realistic?
Okay, sure, I think we know that. Is this how parent assemblies work? Is there such a thing as a parent assembly?
So, good question.
Thank you.
I've only really seen parent assemblies in movies and television.
Okay.
But you've never been to one?
No.
They don't have them?
No.
Like, but
Wait,
there's no.
what?
Is
At
there
least-
ever a meeting where
My
you
kids
have
go
to?
to a private school, but I would
same.
see
This
one
is
of the
like basically
one of the
private school.
unrealistic things about the show is all of these families would be in a private school. I would think, right?
I guess so. They do.
Like Laura Dern's gonna be in a public school. Like,
Yeah, but
she's so obsessed with wealth and
They say that like
houses.
they live in Monterey because the schools
the
are so
district,
great.
yeah.
Like that's one of the things.
No way.
I mean, I agree
No,
with you.
They're still in private school. It's one of the many unrealistic
Okay.
things.
Well,
But with the assemblies thing, I think this is like out of the 70s, 80s. I've never been to one, ever.
Okay.
And if my wife was like, hey, they're having an assembly, and I'd be like, for what? What's going on?
okay.
Why, do
Like
I have
a
to?
PTA meeting, perhaps? Or is that more of a one-on-one
No,
scenario?
like we have
like you
email
would
now.
have?
We have all
Right.
these ways to communicate. We have parent-teacher conferences. That's
Okay,
a big thing.
that's
a big thing,
So you have
yeah.
2 days off, you go in, you have one-on-ones with the teachers, and they say like, hey,
Right.
Ben threw his book the other day, and then you're like, oh, something. And then
Let
you
me
do
ask
the
a
whole thing.
let me ask a follow up. Is there any setting in which you just have seen a parent have a total meltdown? Because this happens a lot on this show. It's obviously not just the assembly is a recent example. I mean, trivia night was just a disaster. There are a lot of people having meltdowns in public.
Great question.
Okay.
Usually this happens at charity auction type things. Okay. The private schools and the public schools, they have these nights.
Okay.
So like 5 or 6 parents would plan them. So they're like Laura Dern, her character would be in
Right, yeah.
charge of this thing.
Okay.
We have this big charity auction, and then all the parents are trying to get parents to donate. You know, like for somebody like me, like when I was working at ESPN, it's like, hey, can you get this ESPN? Maybe they could come to the set of Sports Center. We'll get people to bid, and they just badger you until you feel guilty.
Okay.
Or like go to Jimmy Kimmel Live taping.
Right.
So they'll have like 10 of those things, and then the parents bid on them. They serve them dinner, open bar,
Oh, boy.
and they
Oh, boy,
hope the
yeah.
parents get drunk. And then there's like bidding wars for like, oh, it's a helicopter ride to Santa Barbara for,
That
8
sounds
hours,
nice.
and 2 parents want it. They've had like 9 drinks each.
Okay.
And then they just start going. All of a sudden,
right.
it's like $5,000. But that's when stuff happens because people have like 5, 6 glasses or whatever.
I think you're basically describing the trivia night, except that
Right.
instead of like a fight over a helicopter ride, some
It's a
tragedy
good point.
happened. Yeah.
My thing with trivia night is it would just be like a charity night.
Yeah.
They
There wouldn't be
people.
costumes
Yeah.
and like
Right.
the whole paparazzi. This is
Yeah.
such a valuable insight
really
that we
is.
would
It'd be
not.
like take Lenny for a walk for an hour. It'd be
$2,000.
$5,000.
You should do that.
Yes. Okay. While you're here, though, I don't think we're gonna get another opportunity to talk
Yes.
to a parent with a kid who's, no offense, getting close to that college age. If your daughter said, "I'm not going to college," how would you react? Like Abigail did to Matt.
Wow.
Because we've talked a lot about how we would react,
she's
but
watching
obviously.
So there's 2 types of parents. There's one
Okay,
parent
wow,
that
here we go.
The one type would be like, this is bad for me. My friends are gonna ask me
Yeah,
why my
right.
kid's not going to college.
Which is a
and your
little bit of
default is just selfish, which is every
Madeline
every
situation.
parent on
Yeah.
this show.
Yeah, totally.
Reese's default is always, what are my friends gonna think of me when this happens?
Or I didn't get to do that, so
Yeah.
it's like about her.
I think the other parent would at least like try to listen to what the reasons are. Like I think something that's starting to happen now is people take, what's it called, the year off?
the gap year.
The gap
Yeah.
year.
Right, like Malia Obama. or
Yeah.
Sasha.
So that's a good one for the parents to brag because it's like, what's Amanda doing?
Right.
Oh, she's going to Japan. Really? Yeah, she's taking her
would be
gap
nice.
year.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And then you're disguising the fact that like Amanda couldn't get into Stanford and
That's
doesn't
true.
know what to
Couldn't,
do and she's going to
probably.
reapply in a
Yeah.
year. But yeah, so
Okay.
it's all about like what the other parents think. But I just went through it because in LA, everyone applies for high schools. And it turned into a big whole, everyone's applying the same like 4 or 5 schools and who can get in. It was like college all over again. But then when that Lori Loughlin thing happened, like that
Oh,
was
yes.
really like,
Yeah, how are
that's
the parents
season 3 of
doing
Big Little
after?
Lies.
It's true.
Is that a common?
Yeah. Has
Yeah.
it changed the parent dynamic at all?
No, but it did make us kind of all look at each other a little bit more suspiciously, right?
I guess.
You do have the conversation of who in my life would actually maybe be involved in this 4 years from now.
Okay.
I just
don't
hope
think
I
that
wasn't the answer for anybody.
I was going to say, I don't think you should make any accusations on this show.
No,
but
I
we
wouldn't.
can talk about it afterwards.
I wouldn't,
I have so many questions.
But Lori Laughlin's kid went to an LA private school.
Right.
So, it's in the mix.
Yeah.
Like, it does
Yeah.
make you wonder, did they bribe that athletic director to whatever?
I certainly have some questions.
So many of the moms on this show would have been caught up
Yeah,
in Operation Varsity Blues.
I think you're right, that it's definitely a future plotline.
Mina has the crucial point, though. Why aren't there more dogs in this show? All of these families would have dogs. They would have a dog walker come 7 times a day to walk them. They would never actually spend time with the dog.
I honestly have
dog
no
would be
answer for this.
sad.
You guys are looking at me like I chose not to have dogs on this show, and like I have the answers,
It's a
and
big
I don't
miss.
know.
My thing is, I think Reese doesn't like dogs.
Okay.
I think she's
She
very
does seem like someone who
she's
wouldn't
very
like
like PETA. Like she'd be worried about how the dogs are being taken care of on
I
the
think
set.
that's important
all
in
that
Reese's
stuff.
defense.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I don't.
All right, I'm going to shut this down before anyone says anything else rude about Reese. Bill, this is
I love
very.
it. What are you talking
I know.
about?
Okay,
I've been
I know.
with Reese since Man on
And
the
that's
Moon.
true.
How dare
Okay.
you?
We're gonna
Freeway,
say,
Fear.
That's true. We love Reese.
Pleasantville.
This is a pro
Cruel
Reese
Intentions.
show. Thank you, Bill. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
It is time for Fit of the Week, which is our fashion segment, though fashion in this case is an extremely loose term. This is about choices more than achievement. In this particular case, we gotta talk about Dr. Peep. Is that her name? Is it Dr. Bo Peep?
I mean, is she even a doctor?
There is a therapist in a full Bo Peep shepherd's outfit.
Yes.
Who is allowed alone in a room with Amabella after her anxiety attack. That's basically, she has an anxiety attack and they're like, here's what we'll do. We'll hire you a therapist dressed like a fairy tale, not a fable character.
It's Little Bo, I don't know exactly what you
anyway.
would call Little Bo Peep. Yes, carrying a giant hook. Or crook or chook or I don't know what Little Bo Peep carries, but it's terrifying.
And also, please note, she removes her teeth before she gives the diagnosis to Renata and Gordon. So I just want to point out that fake teeth is like is a real theme on this show. I don't know what it means. I can't, go that deep. Literally, here's
So
what I
many
have written
questions.
down.
Okay.
And this is not kind of pressing fashion criticism, but I'm not, seeing the higher level with this. Just what in God's name is happening? Why are you letting a therapist dress like this around your child who's stressed out?
I think the implication is that children will be more comfortable around an adult wearing a costume, maybe more likely to spill their inner secrets and be honest. I didn't know that was a thing, right? But it isn't completely counterintuitive unless the psychologist in question is carrying a giant, I think it's a crook, and looks like
a staff?
A staff.
Is that sometimes what I don't really know?
shepherds carry staffs, right?
I guess so.
It has
Maybe
that look.
in the
It
Bible.
looks
Clearly,
like-
we're experts on this, but
It looks like a costume like that you would buy on Amazon 4 days before Halloween. And
that's
it's the only
true.
thing
Although I would
available.
not do that because I don't believe in costumes. This is the other thing is that I should just say that I have a deep fear of like interacting with people in costumes.
Really?
Yeah, going back to my own childhood, and there was like a disastrous Annie Oakley performance, which was basically like this minus the therapy. So I'd just like to say, please consider the young Amandas and Emabellas of the world when you are hiring a therapist dressed as a shepherd/shepherdess. Thank you. Okay, thanks. Thank you for hearing me out on that. Let's move on. We should check in on Murder They Wrote, which is when we look at the investigation into the Monterey Five, though, I have some sort of existential questions about the investigation into the Monterey Top Five, because when Mary Louise goes to visit Detective Quinlan, sorry, still mad about the therapist. When she goes to visit Detective Quinlan, and it is kind of the first time that we actually see Detective Quinlan in this. She had been
At a desk.
Yes, at a desk, like doing work. She showed up in the last episode, but you and I were just kind of like, is she a mirage? But no, she's real. And it seems like she's maybe not as interested in this case as Mary Louise is, or at least that's the takeaway that I got.
Well, I kind of hope not. I mean, as I've said to you, I don't really understand why she would be that interested in it. I guess if you thought a crime was a cover-up, but they thought that the murder was self-defense, right? Because they knew from the evidence, from the fact that Celeste had bruises all over her, that not that justifies a murder necessarily,
Right.
but it certainly doesn't seem like anyone's pressing them to solve to solve it.
Yeah.
So I didn't really understand why she was like still on the case necessarily. And judging by their interaction, which granted we don't see her response to Mary Louise, it doesn't seem like it's like a super active.
It seems like she's doing it because Mary Louise is calling her a lot. And because she feels like the responsibility to a deeply nosy and investigative parent who does not respect boundaries of any kind. But I am not sure that I was expecting that. And I also don't know that that is totally rooted like in the text of the show, because they have showed her watching the tape. And they did have at the end of season 1 that kind of binocular thing. So maybe she's interested, but I just got a vibe like maybe she's not the one pursuing this case. Maybe it really just is our Detective Merrill.
Well, let's talk about the case for a second.
Yeah.
What would crack it open? There's only one way in which they would actually solve it, which is one of the women has to come forward. There's no evidence at this point. It would be out if there was like some evidence that the fall wasn't actually accidental, some crime scene, material. But that's out of the picture. It's a confession or bust. So there's one of those 5 women would ostensibly have to come forward. That's the only. So to that respect, unless she's spending time interviewing them or pursuing them, which they haven't shown her doing at all.
Except for that she was when Gordon was arrested, she was on the scene.
Yes.
So I have some follow-up questions. Perhaps we'll find out a little bit more about that. Let's talk about some of the other questions that we have. This is one step ahead. Things to look forward to. Mina, I'm just gonna fire these off to you. We can discuss.
Okay.
Will Ed leave Madeline?
We know he won't.
Yeah, we saw it in the trailer.
In the trailer,
this is not a spoiler. We just saw it in the trailer.
Well, I guess
that could be like a dream. It could be the dream of like her
perhaps.
wedding.
Good point.
Good point. But I'm with you.
Well, I also think they love each other. I mean, that doesn't mean necessarily people don't always stay together when they love each other, but in this episode is really about exploring, it's about a lot of things, but it's about exploring why Madeline cheated on him in the first place. She's grappling with that. She's trying to come to terms with it. And in doing so, it does feel like there's not any fundamental truths being revealed that's like, oh right, these two people should not be together. I don't feel the same way about like, say, Bonnie and Nathan per se.
Right, you queued up my next question. Will Bonnie leave Nathan?
She should. They don't belong together, I think.
I mean, she does admit that, but Nathan doesn't know her at all, and then her mother was like, Bonnie loves her walls. You're trying to hide, that was in the last episode. But it seems like she is not, she's not in the marriage for the right reasons, if you will.
Exactly. Thank you, Bachelor shout out.
There you go.
Yeah, she has been pretty open about the fact that he doesn't understand her.
Yeah.
And whether or not she deliberately sought that out is still an open question. But I kind of feel like you shouldn't be with someone who doesn't understand you.
I agree.
I mean, and so.
I agree, and to the extent that we wanted this season to kind of give some character and some resolution, some backstory to Bonnie, that would be, I suppose, a positive outcome.
Yes.
Or at least depends on how she feels about it, I guess. But I'm with you. All right, what's the going rate for a man cave worth of stuff? This is in reference to Gordon. Well, I suppose to Renata marching into Gordon's like seeming man cave. Apparently, the train room is part of a larger self-indulgence, and she just yells, "Sell all your stuff."
Toys.
Yeah, sell your toys.
I don't know if you noticed, there's like a lot of really fun details in the room. It is elaborate.
Yes.
It's not just a train set. There are models of all kinds.
Yeah.
There's like a simulation bank vault door. Like like that he has inside.
Great. Maybe he should have kept some real money there, and then it wouldn't have been seized by the FBI.
Ooh,
anyway.
Great line for Renata.
Yeah. Will they continue teaching climate change at Otter Bay Elementary?
Here's my thing about this, okay? I understand what Bill said, like maybe you shouldn't teach second graders climate change.
Well, you have to help them understand stuff.
I actually think it's really important for them to learn. I do not believe that Charlotte's Web is an allegory for climate change. Don't teach something that isn't there. But if you want to have a science class...
It's not even should they. I'm just more like, is there going to be any repercussions for the school after all of the angry parents?
No, there never seems to be.
Yeah, they don't really seem to adjust anything.
Yeah.
What will the theme of Emma Bella's birthday party be?
Oh my God. So Renata threatened Gordon.
It was one of 3 points. I believe the other points were sell your toys, and I don't remember what the other one was, but it was quite rude. There's Gordon and Renata not doing well.
Sell your toys. We're going to throw Emma Bella birthday party and blow it out, I think she said.
She's having a hard time.
Perhaps Little Bo Peep.
No, pass. Absolutely not.
They went. And what would you do?
Too soon. I don't even want to think about it.
If you were Emma Bella's age, what would have been your dream, like if you had super, super, super wealthy parents for a birthday party?
I don't know. I just want to swim in the pool and have my own birthday cake that I don't have to share with anybody because I like birthday cake. I don't know. You asked me to be 8, and I went there.
I'm
I was sharing
learning about
this is
you.
I'm sharing about childhood Amanda. It's an honest space. Okay.
No.
What would yours be?
So when I was that age, I really liked dollhouses and Polly Pockets and miniatures.
Yeah.
So maybe like
So
a
you and Meryl
giant
Streep would not be
dollhouse.
friends.
Yeah, me and Gordon on the other hand. Love miniatures, love models.
Okay, this is my last question for you, and you alluded to it earlier, which is that all of these women are having a hard time keeping this secret, and also that the case at this point rests on a confession. And
Yes, someone has to.
And who will crack first? And that is my question: who will crack first?
Okay, so I can't imagine it's Bonnie because
Right.
it's
she
that's
implicates
too
herself.
obvious,
Yes.
and she implicates herself, and they've been kind
Yeah.
of like walks up to the police station.
But that's tough because I don't think any of them will also be willing to throw Bonnie under the bus.
That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
So it would have to be someone who's kind of unfeeling and perhaps doesn't care as much about the other woman.
Oh, no.
I think it's going to be Renata. Because here's the thing, the whole time it seemed, until this episode, it seemed like she's fine.
Okay.
Like, she's not fine, but it
Right.
seems like she hasn't been emotionally affected by the murder, the cover-up, her relationships with the other women, all fine. It's all been about, Gordon and what's going on there. But at the very end of this episode, Gordon, as we discussed earlier, it says, "What are you hiding? Something's up with you."
Yeah.
And that made me think maybe this is getting to her, and she seems like the one of the 5 who would be the most likely to come
She
clean.
does have a history at this point of striding into offices and making wild accusations at people. So it's interesting. We'll find out. Thank you for watching us. This has been Big Little Live in partnership with Buick, and we will be back next week.